You may think that this knight in the center is actually strong, but Magnus understood that his bishop is way stronger than the knight in this situation. The reason is that Peter Liko pushed these pawns, which means these dark squares are weak. And this bishop can actually exploit this. There is also another reason. These 2 pawns in the center that Peter Liko has are on light squares, which means this bishop has all these squares that he can control, and this knight is going to be totally constrained. That's the reason why Magnus here played the move f3. The knight is forced to move, and he decided to exchange rooks. After this exchange, these 3 pawns are on light squares. This bishop is super powerful. He is controlling so many dark squares here. Magnus went with queen a4. He's attacking a pawn that is on a light square that cannot be defended actually by this knight right now. This is one of the best queen infiltration I've ever seen. He comes with the queen here. He's attacking the knight. Let me show you a little bit how it goes, and he goes queen b8. He moves the king, he moves the bishop, and you see what is happening. It creates a blockade. Now, white has total control of dark squares in this situation. In this position, Magnus is playing against Etienne Bacrot. Etienne is playing with the black pieces, but there is something that Magnus understood in this position. He has a very, very annoying pin, and I'm sure you get very annoyed with pins. The reason why this pin is annoying is because this bishop, he's not on e7, which means it's very, very hard to actually unpin yourself. This bishop is on this diagonal. Now, should you exchange this knight? That's the question that I have for you today. Try to find it. Magnus decided to not exchange because if you exchange, the bishop is suddenly coming back on a diagonal where actually this pin means absolutely nothing. I will be able to move the queen on the next move, and if you take the knight, I can just, not like this, I can just take back. There is no way that Magnus would allow this. That's the reason why Magnus here just played this move. Forcing actually attacking this knight, he's forcing actually this knight to take, he takes back. In the game, Etienne went rook e8, and he just long castle here. And you see what's going to happen is that they develop their pieces. He brings the rook, and now he creates another pin. He pushes in the center, that is a very important one, and now there is a second pin. This one is pinned, this one is pinned. And all that Magnus did here, he understood that to get rid of actually this pin was so annoying. This bishop is misplaced. This is what he understood, that the deep meaning of this position is that this bishop should have been on e7, but it's not. So it's super hard to actually get out of the pin. The threat is to simply take, and you take with the pawn and you have and you have a horrible pawn structure. And in the game, Etienne decided to retreat the queen. Now you can take the knight and retreat your rook. And here, look at this position strategically, just because he exchanged your right pieces or refused to exchange the knight on d4, he's having this pawn structure. In this position, Magnus is playing with the black pieces. At first, it may seem like a totally normal and quiet position in our games, but Magnus understood. What you have to do in your games is that you have to forget a little bit the principles. Look at your pieces only. Forget everything else for 2 minutes. And compare each of your piece with your opponent's piece. Compare, for instance, this knight with this one. Which one is best? It's kind of easy to see that this one, is putting a little bit more pressure than this knight that is not really putting any pressure. Now you compare this bishop with this bishop. Well, you start looking at the pawn structure after. And you're like, okay, my pawn structure is on dark squares, which means it restricts the squares of this bishop. Also, his pawn structure, the pawn is in the center is on a dark square, which means even if the bishop actually comes here, he's restricted by his own pawn chain and by my pawns. Knowing this, Magnus decided to play the move bishop b4 because he knows that this is a bad bishop. So what does he want? He wants to exchange this bishop against this knight and then have a superiority with this knight against this bishop. The game continued like this. He took, and now he went rook e8, attacking actually this pawn. He pushed, of course, removing back the knight. And you see what's happening actually when you have a bad position. And let's say here Magnus exchanged the right pieces. What happens is that usually you have some tactics. The bishop here, you may think, okay, you want to put it here? Really? You're losing a piece on the spot. He's attacking both pieces and you're losing. So, here in the game, he protected actually the pawn. Let me show you a little bit what happened. He pushed, he went with the knight, attacking d4. You see how this one is totally inactive. He's just not doing anything. He puts it on b2 just, I don't know why. It doesn't do much. He pushes g4, he brings the rooks, but these rooks actually are not doing anything. They need some minor pieces to be able to create some pressure. So all Magnus has to do is push a pawn. Here he went f3, h4, check, he took, and then the knight took. And this is an amazing position, as you can see. Now there is infiltrations. All Magnus did in this game was exchange the right piece starting with this move. Understanding this is a bad bishop, this is a good knight, I have to basically get rid of this one. In this position, it brings a different element. Magnus is playing with the white pieces against Gata Kamsky. Magnus went against the rules. In this situation, he went and he decided to exchange the bishop for the knight. And I'm not even sure that other GMs would actually decide to take the knight. The reason is that he has double pawns. And when you take the knight, he's going to take back having a very nice pawn structure. But sometimes in chess, you don't have to follow the principles if it's giving you a long-term advantage. So here he took with the pawn, and the long-term advantage that Magnus actually decided to have here is the square on e6. By exchanging this way, Magnus now is getting a grip on the position, playing like this, and bringing the rooks and trying to actually infiltrate and attack the king this way. And queen b6. And you can see that white here has an amazing control over the position. And it all started with deciding to give this bishop for this knight and ignoring the fact that if he takes with a pawn, he has a good pawn structure. You're giving him a good pawn structure, yes, but having this square is way more important than giving him these two pawns. This is what Magnus understood here. In this position, Magnus is playing with the black pieces, and he played a move that is tactical, but the only reason why he played this move is that he understood what kind of pieces he should exchange. It went with knight d4, which may seem totally surprising at first, because you're thinking, okay, maybe he can take actually the knight. No, he can't, because, his opponent would lose the queen. What he's doing is that obviously, if queen takes queen, which is a blunder, he saw knight takes, the king comes here, attacking, you take back the queen, he takes the knight, and at the end of the variation, there is this move. And this knight cannot move, otherwise this bishop actually is grabbing this one. So it means that he understood that actually his move is just to exchange pieces, and let me explain why. After this move, the queen cannot take. We just actually saw the variation, which means he had to retreat with the queen. This move, knight d4, it allowed him to get a long-term advantage by exchanging all the important pieces that he thought were important to exchange. He exchanged the knight, we check, the queen took. Now he exchanged the bishop. Now he exchanged this one. In this situation, after the move d5, for instance, he understood that his knight is way stronger than this bishop because these pawns are on the same color. These pawns, all these, are on the same color as this bishop. And after he pushes d5, this bishop is going to get restricted. Not this knight. This knight will be able to jump and control very important squares. Magnus here is playing with the white pieces, and he has a decision to make. Would you actually exchange here the bishop for the knight? Or do you think that your bishop is actually worth more than the knight? Try to take a sec and just think about this. In this position, what Magnus understood is that if you get rid of this knight is the support of this pawn. If I get rid of him, which is what happened in the game, and then take the pawn, you cannot actually take back. There is a tactical justification for it. If you take actually with the rook here, there is this strong move queen d4. And then when they move the rook, you can take on e4. So be careful because there is a very, very nasty pin. But Magnus didn't fall for this, right? So in the game, it didn't go like this. He exchanged the bishop for the knight. He understood this bishop is weaker than this knight. so I have to exchange it. Now I have to put pressure on c5 here. When he takes, I just bring the knight and I put pressure on this pawn. I'm also creating a discovery on the queen. When the queen moves, I exchange rooks and I take the pawn. Now look at the position that he gets. He has a very active knight, but this is a bad bishop. The reason is it's basically not doing much actually with the pawn on e4. And he's going to strengthen this idea by playing actually this move, f3. Very important, because now you have 3 pawns. It's extremely hard for this bishop to actually come in play. So the golden rule to understand when to exchange pieces is that you have to look at the long-term edge that you are getting. Just ask yourself, if I exchange my knight against the bishop, am I getting a long-term advantage? Am I getting a better endgame? You have to think about this in the middle game. You have to think about the endgame transpositions. If I exchange this piece against this one, am I having a long-term advantage? This is the golden rule.